Hello and welcome to Coding with the .NET API for Sage CRM. This is the second part of two lessons that have been dealing with the .NET API, and it also means that we're on the 18th lesson within the cycle of 18 that we have been going through, and we're at the end. Today we are going to be exploring the specialized classes within the .NET API, looking at how they fit into projects that you might well want to create, how you can consider all of the different purposes of the specialized classes, and then go on to think about things like calling .NET projects from workflow, being able to customize and enhance the specialized classes by using some of the overrides that are available, and look at examples of building complex pages, as well as controlling screen positioning. Some of this we looked at in the previous lesson, but we can't hope to cover absolutely everything about the .NET API within the course of an hour's presentation. So hopefully this will build on all of the information that was in the previous lesson, plus it will then clarify some additional information for you as well, some of the techniques that we're using. So if we have a look at this idea of the specialized classes, our starting point is actually going to be back inside the product, inside a development environment, and I'm using Visual Studio for this. I'm going to make the assumption that we have downloaded the SDK, we've installed that, and so that's available on our machines. And what you see as you start a project, you've got the option of working with either the basic template or the entity template. Now, I will be looking at the idea of the entity template and what that produces in a moment, because that's probably that's a very, very easy way of getting to grips with what the point of the specialized classes are. But I want to look and start with really the basic template experience first of all, because it will allow me to reinforce what I was saying about the SDK in our last lesson. So our SDK can be used with lots of snippets to be able to allow us to construct anything that we like, and the anything that we want to do template really is the basic template. We say it's a basic template because, well, we saw in the last lesson it had a hello world example, but in fact the basic template is what nearly all of the structures that we create inside Sage CRM, like the add-ons that we've used for the related entities feature or the company narrative, they were all built using the basic template, because it is very much the template or environment that allows us to build whatever type of behavior we want to use. It offers us the greatest freedom in doing that. So let's assume that we are working with the basic template and within a development environment such as Visual Studio 22 or 2017 or whatever version you're using. Some of the slides come from all sorts of different versions of Visual Studio. I think these are all 22 versions. You can see here we are waiting to make a decision as whether we want to use the basic or the entity template. Well, actually, I'm going to go with the basic template, start that process, giving it a name. Here you can see that I've called it CRM Oppo, and I could start working away on this. So here is here's my CRM special, and here you can see that I've created my first set of classes. The basic and the custom page classes are automatically generated for the solution using the basic template, and I've just opened these up into the workspace of the IDE, the Integrated Development Environment. Notice here that I've got the idea of the run my custom page. It would be then the function that we want. So that's the base. The base.cs class is the one that contains the app factory. That's the one that contains the function that will be publicly exposed and then invoked from the CRM interface. Over here, I've got my custom page.cs page. Now, this is the hello world. This is what we spent most of the time looking at in the last lesson. But what I want to do here, of course, is to sweep that away. I want to be able to write something fresh and new. And what I can do is to start the process of adding in a new class into this project. And what I'll do here is to go and add a new class, and this new class is going to be just a simple plain CS file, and so I can start to write that in here. So this is what the Visual Studio has given me. Now, I need to make this a CRM class. So to do that, I'm going to make use of the SDK features and the snippets that have been imported in here. So to do that, I'm going to highlight all of the generated default information and get rid of it, and then go through the process of going into right mouse click, insert snippet, and going to find the snippets that I'm interested in. In this case, I've come down to look at my code snippets into the Sage CRM snippets, and then into the .NET ones. So I'm looking at the .NET snippets, and I've scrolled down to find where I've got the reference to a list class, a list page specialized class, which is designed to work with a single context. And that means we're thinking of a page here that would be called from only one context. So it's designed to be used, say, in the company context, rather than not knowing which context it might be. It might be called like a communication page is called from the company, the person, the opportunity, the case, etc. So different contexts could be used. Well, here I'm choosing a nice simple one, just choosing a single context, and bang, this is the code that has been generated. So here you can see all of the assumed possible namespace references that are needed. The only one that is referenced in this particular project is the sage.crm web object namespace. You can see that it's prompting us now to start to entering in and overriding the snippet code to provide the information that we want to make it our class. And you can see that I've put CRM special as the namespace reference. I've given it as oppo list as the name of this, and that would be inherited down into the public instance of that. So I've got now considerations of what I need to put in terms of the opportunity as the entity, the opportunity list, and the opportunity filter box. So this is our builder as we are overriding some of the settings of what the class is, so that we know it's going to be rendering out, accessing the right metadata that we need. And this is the magic of a specialized class. The specialized class is goes beyond a little bit more of saying, oh, I just want, if you know the ASP environment within CRM, we know that we have this very simple way of creating, say, a list page in about 5 lines of code. We establish our context, we establish the the list page that we want to use. We then build the argument string that restricts the list based on the context, and we then add the block to the page, generate the page, and write it out to the browser. There's about 5 lines of code typically, and this is the equivalent of doing this. We can see here that we can at this point decide that what we're constructing at this point, all we need to do is reference the names of the metadata that is of interest and explain how the communication between the different metadata elements are going to be used. We can think of this as a type of container template. So we are slotting things into the right place, the metadata structures, but the plumbing is already built in. But you'll notice in the comments that are included in this that it is perfectly possible to be able to override the settings that we want. So we can have access now to the filter screen and the results grid. These are the names of objects that we can use to provide further overrides to change their behavior. So perhaps changing the number of rows within the results grid that would be displayed, rather than simply inheriting the preferences from the user. Okay, so that's the purpose of a specialized class, is to be able to rapidly construct a page based on the metadata. And we see this in its best possible light when we come on to using the entity template inside this. And we're used to working with perhaps the advanced customization wizard inside Sage CRM and generating the data structures and the ASP pages together. Well, here there is no generation of the the physical data structures. What is generated instead is just the interface elements, the screens and the lists that would then interact with whatever is done. So when you come to using the advanced customization wizard, you're going to assume that you've run this and checked the checkbox to say it's a .NET component. So so we're not going to then generate the ASP pages. We're going to rely on the idea of invoking all of the user elements through the .NET API. Now, let's see what this is and what it's going to create for us. So it's going to invite us to start creating a new project, and I'm going to select the entity template project and give it a name. In fact, I will call this a very simple custom oppo name, and I'll keep going with the construction and running of this template. So this template actually has to ask some questions in order to generate the appropriate pages, and this template needs to know what's the entity that we're building this for, what's the primary key that we're building this for, and what is the table prefix, so it can make some assumptions about the foreign key references that it needs to use. Here, if we zoom in on this, these entity name, ID field and prefix, this is easier to understand if we first of all experiment this for an existing entity within the system. So it's the starting project is to recreate some of the management of an entity like the opportunity. So you can start to put in here the entity name would be the opportunity, the ID field is oppo_opportunity ID, and the prefix would be oppo. Now this is going to generate the classes or pages that supports this entity. If we go right the way back to the early parts of the lesson, I talked about the concept of thinking about the screen flow for a customization. So screen flow is here inbuilt. It's going to be building for us a page to handle the display of the main summary page for an entity, a list page, an edit page for that entity, a delete page for that entity, and an entry page for that entity. And it will have that assumption about what happens and how you move. It will make assumptions about which pages it's going to as it saves or once it's on commit. We'll talk about some of these moments that we can, or events that we can override to control the navigation in a moment. But it assumes that if you run the entity, run this entity template, all of that navigation will be automatically built in, and it's going to be able to assume the names of your classes that are contained within the base.cs file, which are the publicly exposed classes. They can be changed, but there are some assumptions made. So in using the entity template, it's a good idea to keep each entity template project separate, so you're not trying to handle multiple tables within the same multiple template. So you could put them all into the same DLL, but it's easier on the imagination, I find, to be able to keep everything inside. You'll see, though, in the way that it is generated, that the classes themselves are organized. Now, anyway, let's see what takes place here. I've put in the information that I need into my builder, and I'm running the project, and straight away on the right hand side you see it has created for me the structure for this solution. And if we look inside here, you can see all of the different oppo, all of the different structures have been put down into the data pages. So this is an organization for our namespace, and the page that I'm looking now is at the base.cs class file, which contains our app factory, which contains where to find all of the functions within inside our project. So it's looking at our namespace of the custom oppo data pages, declaring those are the definitions of where to find it, and so it's able to reference those neatly within inside the code. As we look at these, and this is where we come into the detail of our code, this is the simple data page view. This is the equivalent in the it's the equivalent of a summary page constructed within inside the COM ASP API. What the page is doing is it's retrieving a screen from metadata, and it's then combining that with a record from the database with the context that it needs. So it's assuming here that the page is invoked in a particular context to know that it's passed the oppo_opportunity ID as the context information. So imagine that this is called from a list, and the list inside CRM, when you define a hyperlink on a list, you would say what is the place that you're going to and what is the key that you're passing across. And so where we're going is obviously this DLL and this function, and the key is the context. Opportunity is the entity, and their opportunity detail box is the screen that is being used. So as we get this, you'll notice that we have this base definition, and then we have a function that is an override to construct the build contents. Now, this particular example of this is giving us an idea that what we could do is, before we simply say build the contents of the page, we could override some more information about this page. This is providing us the instructions that where the add code here is listed, this is where we would choose to use some of the other behavior, such as adding in, if we wanted to, the buttons and other messages onto the screen. So it is to do with how we want to display that. If we start to see if we start to see an understanding of some of the discussion of what this page is doing, or another type of page like the list page, you can see here that we've got information that we can have displayed around the complexity of the page, but this time in the structure of the page we've got two different metadata being referenced. So we've got the idea of the list and the filter box. So this is giving us an idea that when we look at a list page, and the specialized classes will be using a different constructor to be able to then render out the created HTML. And in all times within the build contents, which all of these specialized classes offer us, we can do additional work. So if we wanted to, we can get additional information or adding additional information into the page. So our scope of reference is anything that is passed in from the URL, any of the CGI information, any of the common gateway information that we can extract from the HTTP request, and then because we have the contextual information, we can go off to get any database information we want before we change before we then have to draw the page. So we can go off and get this information and use this in the override of the build contents. And that's, as you can see here, demonstrating how we can get contextual information that enriches our page. Sorry, let me dwell on this a little bit more. So in something like this list page, if we wanted to, within a list page, we can obtain the preferences of the user. We can override the preferences of the user. As you can see here, we can see what is the user grid size, the user options for the grid size. So if a user wants to use 20 rows instead of 10, they can, in terms of the display. This, by the way, is where the .NET API gives you far more control than the ASP.COM API, or easier control, I should say, to be able to determine the number of rows you want to be displayed. Examples of how to do this is shown, I'll mention a little bit later on explicitly about this later on in this presentation, but if you want to go and hunt for it yourself about how it's used, the sample projects that are shipped with the SDK will show you how to use the override on preferences for lists and how you can set those. Now, other information that we can use is to be able to manage to get hold of information about the information about the context. Here you can see that this example on getting hold of information in the key list would be reading what's in the URL, not necessarily the information that is contained within the session, because that is the information that the SID is the primary information, contains the information about who is the current user. This, by the way, is where to give you an understanding of what that means is, if you think about when you look at the context of my CRM and you look at the listing of opportunities for yourself as one user, but within the My CRM user menu, you might be able to look and see the additional users that you're allowed to see in order to change and see what work they're assigned. So they will become the selected user. The selected user provides the information on the current user in context, but not you as the user that you are, because that information is obtained in that information is always obtained from the SID. It's useful as well to be able to know, and this is perhaps a little bit another improvement over the ASP.com environment. You'll see that you can always be able to be clear what the dominant key is, so which is the main context. In terms of CRM speak, this is the key 0 value. So key 0 is going to be set to be, if it was set to be 1, it would be the company. If it was set to be 4, it would be the user context, and so on. There are different namespaces that we're accessing here. So here you can see that we're able to get hold of metadata information, reading information from the parameters for the system. So it's very useful to be able to go in and see any of the parameter information that you would normally be able to access through the user interface. You can identify what is happening, and when it comes to processing and information to know whether you're passing off behavior to another location, to another bit of code, so another class, then we've got some inbuilt behavior to allow it to identify what the name of the interior.net DLL is and what our own function is called. So you've got the ability to get hold of this .NET DLL and this .NET function to work out where you are, and that's useful for building returns and for building buttons. So buttons which will send you off somewhere, and then a URL path that you might want to do something and then return back to this original page. You also have the HTTP information. As I mentioned, you've got a scope of reference within the .NET API that is not just limited to the URL information, but it's to anything that comes from the headers of the HTTP request. And so you can read all of the dispatch server variables as well. They're accessible to us. Okay. Now, in terms of what we can see here, this is a data page. We can see, reminding us that when we're looking at a data page, we've got the override that we've got in front of us, which is the public override for the build contents. This is always going to then end up with the calling the build contents from the base. But you can you can handle errors and things like that in any way that you want. The data page is that types of behavior that you can choose to override is where you can see that what I've put here on the right hand side is that you can start to confirm whether or not you want to have tabs displayed on the page, whether you want, if it's an edit page, whether or not you want the workflow buttons to be displayed on the page, because it is important to realize that if the entity supports workflow, then workflow will be available on any of the .NET pages constructed for that entity. And so use entity tabs, use workflow, set those to be true, and they would appear. If you don't, then they're switched off. And this .edit method, run data page edit, this .continue method, run list page. This is where, in a very customized environment, and you are not relying on the classes automatically built by the entity inside the base class, this is where you can override them. So notice where it's got this .edit method, this .continue method on the right hand side, and then what those are called, the run data page information. If I just go back to an earlier slide when we were looking at the base classes created, this is something to just really point out, that our base class, as you can see, contains a lot of the run whatever functions. So our edit classes are expecting, or our generated classes are expecting, the classes to be named as they are inside as a product of the template. But you could have changed those in the app factory, or you could be working in using a specialized class in the context of actually a basic template, where you've created the project and you've then just used, as I started off doing earlier on, where I created a where I created my own specialized class within the context of a project that was already working. So sorry, I'll find the right page here. This is where we've got our overrides, as you can see here, where you can control exactly how you navigate between the specialized classes as you perform standard behavior inside the environment, inside the project that you're working on. So this is an example of code for an edit page. You can see that the edit page is handling the idea of mode for us. It is assuming that this will display the class direct when it retrieves and generates the HTML. It will retrieve it and generate it in the correct form. Our need here is again very similar, where we would want to be overriding what we want in terms of the cancel method, because we don't want to edit it, or we want to go ahead and delete, or we want to save the changes that we've made. We can determine where we're going to go within the override. within the constructor here, and then we can also make use of whether we want to think about workflow or not as well. So if we have got some behavior that we want to double check when it comes to in our edit page, that we want to add additional validation, we can do that as well. So within the context of a data page edit, or even a new, both of these allow us to add in an additional validation moment. So this interferes with the commit process. So when it comes to custom validation, we can override the default validate method, which is part of the build contents. So here the validate is being invoked. You'll notice that the way in which I'm doing this is to see if we validate base.validate as the function, Boolean OK. Now, if there was a problem, if OK, I do my the value of OK is actually defined as a product of a check to see as I'm reading the contents of the screen. So I'm introducing you here now to a new dispatch.content field method to read what's being displayed within the metadata structure. So right back here in our constructor, we have specified that we've got the opportunity detail box. So I'm assuming that core name is a field on that particular screen. Now, in the case of an opportunity screen, it would be oppo_description or oppo_ whatever. So I can read that field. I can evaluate to see whether it is a correct value, and if it's incorrect for any reason, I can set the value of my flag OK to be false, generate an error, then pass that back for the check with the base validation. So this is validation that is not dependent on validation rules being set for the screen. This is custom validation that is taking place within the processing of the code, and it's not even table level scripting either. So this is where we can put custom behavior to add value to any extension that we're creating. Okay. Now, what goes for new updates also goes for deletes, and so we could provide, as you can see here, we've got the ability to, for our constructor, well, we can, for a delete, we can also do some overriding in this context as well. We know when we come to deleting, we can provide information around the unique identifier, the table, the screen that we're using for the delete process. What we typically have to think about is what happens after the delete. So where do we go, assuming that we have managed to delete correctly? But we can also, in the delete, think about putting in additional validation checks. We can do a validate to prove that there is no difficulty with perhaps leaving an orphaned record or some other check within inside the server. When it comes to the creation of a new record, very similar to what we've looked at before. Here I've got a little bit more information in here, because what you may want to do is explore the idea of automatically setting field values without having to have them displayed on the screen. Now I've got my constructor for the data page new. I can see my base method, which is to make use of our table name, field name, and the screen name. And you can see that I can use all of the workflow things that I've looked at first of all, which is the idea of save method and use workflow. But you'll notice as well that as a record is created, I can set workflow values and say this dot workflow name, this workflow state. That's going to be the values that we push into the workflow. But you can also see that we can add in additional behavior that once the record has been created, an additional update can be issued. So notice here that I have got where I'm grabbing hold of the record that's in the current screen. So screen.get record. So I now have that record. I can then set a field value if I want, and you can see that this particular idea is that I'm reaching into the contextual information to grab the current company ID and setting that into a field for the company ID field, and again for the XXX person ID or person ID, I'm using the same idea of getting hold of contextual information, in this case the person ID, and writing it into the person field. These don't appear on the screen. I can then issue save changes to force the update of that record so that I carry out my my save, and all of this information would be updated automatically behind the scene. So this means that if you are in the context of a company and a person, and you're entering a new record, you don't need to enter anything else or have them on the screen. Your screens can be abbreviated to what they need to, and all other information can be set automatically as you just fill in the core information, and the rest comes from the overall context of the record. So this is the override, as you can see here. Sorry, this should have been a bit better. Now, you'll notice that in this case, I've got the idea of the entry group screen. This is where you're using a potential complex environment where it is possible to move to compound screens where you have more than one entry group on the screen. The examples that are built automatically within inside here, you'll see assumes that there is only the one screen. So table name, field name, screen name is used within the constructor, and we aren't working with multiples, but it is possible where you are working in your own compound screen, and you want to be able to ensure that you're talking about the right record in the right screen. You can there is an array then of screens within inside the page, and so this is getting hold of the first element, the first screen that's on the page, getting the record, and then being able to set those values. Okay. One of the hard things to do inside Sage CRM is build lists with filters and search pages. We typically build up to building a list page by starting to build a search page, because it's got a nice box on top and then a list underneath. Search pages, list pages inside the .NET API are very simple to be able to use. Here you can see we're using the specialized class. Just requires us to specify the search box and the search grid, and the communication between those is assumed, and it is very easy to do. You can, because you've got access to the search screen and results grid objects, you can further customize this, and you can also notice that if this is a proper entity, you'll see that you can choose to use the idea of the saved searches previous, automatically turn on that feature to allow for saved searches to be used. Moving to where we can think about .NET extensions inside the workflow, it is very useful. The .NET API and ASP page is very simple to be able to use. It is just a question of knowing the DLL name and knowing the method that is exposed within the app factory to then invoke a .NET DLL inside a Sage CRM workflow as a custom workflow action. We have seen that you can set workflow rules, workflow information for a record as well, so those can be manipulated within the custom workflow, and it is possible then to really construct your workflow in any way you like. And because there is this dispatch object inside the DLL, it allows you to redirect to anywhere you like. So you could have a workflow action that calls a DLL, that processes everything, and then redirects after the end of whatever your action is back to a standard entity page. So that could be your custom DLL, or it could actually be a system entity as well, just because we've got this dispatch that you can use. I mentioned how we can get hold of screens and we can get hold of grids, because there is this idea of the search box or the results grid. These are inbuilt. You can get hold of the details of individual screens by using the entry group that is created. You can obtain that. You can also build screens from scratch, which is actually I talked about in the last lesson, but the examples that I'll show you in a moment go into some details that they don't use the specialized classes. These are using the generalized web class, but the metadata objects that you can invoke and create them in any way that you like. We can link to whatever we want to within inside our grids and lists and our buttons. So you can see you can redirect from an ASP page to a .NET page, from a .NET page to an ASP page as well. You can jump from .NET project to .NET project in any way that you like. And we can now start to think in terms of compound and complex screens. If we're thinking about complex and compound screens, then I would point you in the direction of the sample projects. These are the ones that will teach you the most on the usage of the .NET API. Sitting in with me is one thing, but actually being able to see how the code is used is the main thing. So if you want to know how to work with records, there are two examples shipped with the SDK called Compound Entry and Compound Summary. Here is the compound entry example. We're looking here at an entry screen. You can see that in our example, we've got usage of how we construct a screen using an entry group. What you have to understand here is that we're no longer using a specialized class. We're using the generalized web class, or the basic template, if you like, to have constructed this page. And so everything is something that we are doing from scratch. And that means we have to retrieve the metadata, retrieve the application data, merge the two ourselves, and then to generate the interface. But you can see as well that we're wrapping the page with an HTML form. We are obtaining a screen object that we're calling screen company box long, retrieving the company box long from metadata using the new entry group mechanism. We're then setting properties like the title, which will have an impact on the HTML that is displayed. We've retrieved translations to ensure that that's correct, and so on. We can retrieve that for a person screen as well. So this is all obtaining information. So this is getting company, person, opportunity information. This is a compound entry screen. So this is so you can swiftly enter everything together if you wanted to. Now, it's looking at the pages, assembling all of the record information. It's going to be adding that to the page and then displaying this in and then we'll be displaying that in edit mode so that the entry can take place. Have a look at that. You'll see that that's going to be showing you how to handle screens. And another example here is shown in the company summary, looking at how we can assemble contextual information, use contextual information then to allow us to assemble information that isn't necessarily displayed on the screen. You can see we're building here an SQL statement to be able to make sure that we've got the information from the person link tables and the phone link tables, etc. And it is then allowing us to construct the HTML that we want, which will eventually be displayed into structures on the screen. Now, when it comes to displaying things onto the screen, the two remaining template examples are very useful to us. The quick look, I'll just deal with the quick look here. It is one that introduces us to a number of very important ideas. As we see here, we can control, once we've got a list, we can control the rows per screen. We can decide whether a list is going to have any navigation on there as well. So we can decide its title. We can also filter the list. So these are very nice controls that we have inside the .NET API. We can control which tab group we're displaying. We can control all of these. You can see as we go through now, if we have got structures, we need to be able to start to slot them into the correct position within the page. In the last lesson, we looked at the fact that Sage CRM tends to write things out. The individual methods that we're using within our classes know how and where it should write certain information onto the screens. So buttons are always put into the onto the right hand side of the page, because that's where buttons belong. Error messages always go to the very top of the page. If we are invoking and displaying an information message, it goes underneath an error message, and so on. So it knows where to put the structures of the page based on the type of output that we've got. And we can build the locations of things into a type of structure that can be thought of as a container, analogous to ASP.COM containers, but we call panels within the .NET API. So there can be a horizontal panel, there can be a vertical panel, and these are each able to be grouped together into the page. So a vertical panel may contain several horizontal panels, and those horizontal panels could contain multiple screen elements that we're wanting to write out. If you want to understand panel usage and control of the interface, then the Quick Look project is going to be best for you there. And as you can see, this is the Quick Look project in action. And I'm showing you this because this is demonstrating this within Sage CRM 24R1. This happened to be a project that was written in 2021 R1, this particular page, and it has been dropped into 2024 R1, demonstrating how the .NET API is compatible with the new features of 24R1, including things like, as you can see at the bottom right, the chat bot, and on the top left, you can see tags have been used within this company context that the Quick Look is displayed within. So this is showing how you've got a fair amount of integrity within the .NET API, knowing that if you've written something within one version, it will be upgrade safe, being able to be deployed into and being upgraded into the next version. We've come to the end of our cycle of 18 lessons. Thank you so much for attending. Goodbye.